Good evening, everyone. Osa here for AOP Tech. Hope everyone is having a wonderful Wednesday today. I'm so glad to see so many new names and some familiar names on our list joining us tonight. It's wonderful to see how this has grown for us. So thank you for taking time out of your busy week to join us. It will be fantastic. So tonight we're gonna talk about the 8 pillars of digital literacy with Aaron. A lot of you know Aaron. He's our tech coach there. So let's get ourselves started. Can you see my screen?
No.
No.
No. Let me show my screen.
Got it.
There we go. Now we got it. Thanks there. I knew I was missing a button, everyone. Thanks for your patience. So let's start ourselves off as we do all good things in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, enable us to teach with wisdom, for we help shape the minds of our students. Help equip us to teach the truth, for we help shape students' conscience. Encourage us to teach with vision, for we help shape the future. Empower me to teach with love, for we help shape the world. St. John Newman, pray for us. St. Isidore, patron saint of technology, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So a few things of housekeeping before we get started with our presentation this evening. First and foremost, an archive of this webinar this evening will be available on our YouTube channel. If you haven't heard, AOP Tech is on YouTube. You just search AOP Tech and you can find our channel. And we have lots of great videos there on all things Google, web tools, different administrator tools, and all of our webinar archives are located on that as well. So you're able to share that with your colleagues or go back to anything that you might have missed. Know that too, as well as a piece of housekeeping, you'll receive an email about 24 hours from now that will have links to Aaron's presentation. It will also have a link to the webinar archive in there. Finally, as a piece of housekeeping as well, if you registered on courseware for Act 48, please know that this is a 2-part series. So tonight is part 1 of that. And next month in November, we'll be talking about utilizing news media in the elementary classroom. And that's part 2 of this series. In order to receive those credits, you do need to participate in both the October and November webinars for that. Know that today, too, we're also doing something new. We'll pop into the chat window in just a moment a link for today's meet, which is a Backchannel Chat tool. And that will allow you to really interact and be a part of our presentation this evening. So a great way to kick off and spend time during Connected Educators Month. Many of you know Aaron. Aaron is our tech coach pre-K to 12 for Delaware and Philadelphia South counties, and he's met many of you out on travels there. And so Aaron is our presenter tonight, and he is going to have a fabulous topic of digital citizenship this week, or this month, excuse me. It is awesome, and I know you guys will be really excited, and I really do encourage you to participate in that back channel chat. Annabelle, our newest tech coach, is also here with us this evening, and Annabelle and I will be in the back channel chat continuing with you all, so that way we can really interact with Aaron when the presentation gets going here. So with that, it's time to throw it over to you, Aaron. Give me just one moment, and I'm gonna stand the controls to you. It's all tricky because we're all listed as Bill Brannick, who isn't here today. So it makes it a little tricky to figure out who's who. There we go. Is that there for you, Aaron?
Perfect. And can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. There you are.
Excellent. Excellent. So thank you for the introduction, Alyssa. I really appreciate it. And in fact, the title for our presentation today is What is Digital Literacy? And you'll notice the fact that we are on version 4 already.
Aaron, how are we on version 4 already?
I know, first webinar of the year, right? We're already on number 4. How did we get there? And that's a great question, which we will break down. I'll explain why we're on version 4 already. Like, did we miss any? You haven't missed any. This is our first webinar, but we're already on version 4, and I'll walk you through how we got to version 4. And then, of course, we have kind of the subtitle, a remix of Doug Belshaw's book, The Essential Elements of Digital Literacies. And there's a lot to break down just in this slide alone. So not only do we have this 4th version, but we also have this idea of a remix. So we need to define what a remix is. And I have some treats out there for you. If you're an audiophile, you will certainly get a kick out of some of the things that are later to come in the webinar. And of course, then we have this question of the elements of digital literacies. Why are they plural? Who's Doug Belshaw? So that's really where we're going to go today. We're going to break down all those terms. We're going to explain who Doug is, what a remix is, why literacies is plural, and how we got on version 4. So that's kind of a big picture overview of what we're doing today. But certainly I want to first start off by thanking you. I want to thank you guys for attending. I want to thank you guys for inviting us into your classrooms. I've had an opportunity to visit a lot of classes and be invited into classrooms. And thank you for giving up part of your Wednesday evening to join us tonight. So I really appreciate it. And truly, without you being there and without your support, we wouldn't be here. So thank you so much for that. And I also certainly wanted to thank the co-hosts for this evening, Alyssa and Annabelle. They're doing a great job. They're going to work in the back channel, as Alyssa mentioned. So you'll see them kind of pop in and out. We're also going to bring them into the presentation a little later as well. As Alyssa mentioned, today's meet is a really great free tool that you can use in your classroom for discussions, sharing resources. In fact, I even saw one teacher use it as basically a method for her students to submit ideas for a review. They were having a test coming up, and it was a really collaborative method to have the kids share ideas and resources for that upcoming test. And when we get into today's meet, I'll pop out and kind of do a teacher view for you, so that way you can kind of see what it is and the inner workings of it. As Alyssa mentioned, the copies for this presentation will be included in the archive video email tomorrow. So you get an email, there'll be a copy of this video suitable for watching over and over, sending to friends, family, relatives, including it in that Christmas list. Certainly, I would be okay with that. And also, of course, this slide deck presentation. And I encourage you guys to share that with your neighbors, share it with your colleagues, your administrators, because I think there's a lot of really great resources in here that I want you to be able to explore and to digest and to come back to. So I started off by teasing you with this idea of a remix. Certainly, if anyone, if you ever walked past my room when I was doing the Connolly Tech Academy, there was just a little bit of music. You could probably hear it as you were coming down the hallway there. I use a lot of music, a lot of different varieties. I was always at that 100 station limit in Pandora. And I used music in my classroom a lot, not only just as background, but also as a method to really share different experiences with my students, to take them to different places. And so certainly we listened to some top 40, and we listened to some oldies, but we also listened to French rock and roll, and I had an amazing Indian club station. It was incredible. I loved it. And so today I wanted to bring in some music for my webinar today to share with you guys. And so we're going to go back to the 1979 The Whispers. They're a group from LA, and they did a song called The Beat Goes On. And I really like this because this is a really great example of what a remix is. So we're going to listen to that song first. And then, of course, I'm from Philadelphia, so I gotta rep a Philly boy as well. We're going to move 18 years into the future, and we're going to listen to the 1997 song Will Smith's Miami, which we can all think back where we were in 1997. I'm pretty sure I was at a school dance as an attendee. So, dating myself just a little bit. So 1997, Will Smith's song Miami. So let's cue up. We're going to listen to the Whispers first, and then we're going to go to Miami. So here's the Whispers, and the beat goes on. You can do a little air guitar if you want, that's fine. All right, and so the key thing that I wanted you to listen to was that backbeat, that guitar riff on top. That one right there. That sound. Now we're going to go 18 years in the future to Will Smith's Miami. And this is a great example of a remix. So listen for that same sound in this song.
Miami. South Beach. Can y'all feel that? Can y'all feel that? Check it out.
So you heard that same, and let's see if I can cue it up.
Can y'all feel that?
Right there, same as we heard with the Whispers. So for those of you who, with the better speakers out there, you probably heard the tone is a little adjusted, and Will Smith did adjust the speed. I had a mixing program that I really wanted to use, and I was going to go back and forth. So that is an example of a remix. And so what Will Smith did, and I mentioned this in the title, that I was remixing Doug Belshaw's book in this presentation. And so really, what I am doing with Doug Belshaw's book, Will Smith did with the Whispers. So Will Smith took that Whisper song and he remixed it into a brand new song 18 years later. Any webinar where I can play some Will Smith is a good webinar, right? So that's exactly what I'm doing for Doug Belshaw. I'm going to take his kind of backbeat, that groove he laid down, I'm going to chop it up, and I'm going to bring some new flavors to the party. And together with you, we're going to actually build something new. So that's where we're going. But before we get started with really kind of the bulk of the presentation, of course, we need to first introduce you to Doug. So who is Doug? Doug Belshaw is a self-professed open educational thinker. You may have heard of the open education movement. I certainly recommend checking out the open education resources because really what the open education movement is doing, and I hope nobody on here is a member of a publishing company, because really they're kind of going after the publishing companies in a very DIY grassroots effort, and it's really exciting. And we think about the textbooks and the workbooks that the publishing companies put out, and we realize the fact that these are really expensive resources. And not only that, the fact that, and you know, this is why some of us had maybe grew up reading history textbooks that said, one day we'll get to the moon, because you know, those textbooks are expensive, and schools not only, you know, can't necessarily always afford to purchase that latest edition or that newest edition, and that's true here in America, but definitely if you look around the world, you know, people in Africa and China and Asia, they may not necessarily be able to order those advanced books. Yet in the age of the internet and the open education movement, we really see this trend where teachers are putting resources and materials, including entire books. There's an entire biology series on the open education website. It's incredible, truly. So I definitely recommend checking that out. But that is to give you an idea of what Doug is about. So he's big about creating free resources for teachers to use in their classrooms. Currently, he is the founder of a company called Dynamic Skillset Limited. And there he advises clients on new issues around literacies. And in fact, that was really the focus of his doctoral thesis. And that's really from his doctoral thesis, he started talking about literacies. He then moved and actually created a book for it. And while he was doing that, he was actually working for the nonprofit, the Mozilla Foundation. So if you've used the Firefox browser, that is a product of the Mozilla Foundation. And when he was working for Mozilla, he was working on the web literacy map and open badges. Before that, he was a teacher. Then he was a senior school leader. He went on to get his bachelor's in philosophy from the University of Sheffield and a master's in modern history from Durham University, and then finally his doctorate from Durham University as well. And so if you're wondering where Durham University in Sheffield is, it is in the United Kingdom. And so while Doug and I, we've emailed back and forth and tweeting at him, I was really hoping that he could be with us here today, but the time difference, it just really didn't work out. But we have made up for that by providing these links here, and I'll kind of walk you through some of these links. The first one, this is Doug's website, and I certainly encourage you guys to come back to these web pages and to visit them. He has a newsletter here, which I definitely recommend subscribing for. He calls it Thought Shrapnel, and there's always a really nice mix of humor, of resources. We followed that up with his blog on literacies. And here as well, a lot of really great resources, a lot of opportunities to interact with other educators. We see some of his presentations, and we'll come back to his presentations in a second. Now, for this presentation, I was able to get his ebook, which he has presented for free. Now, he does ask for, I think, a 99-cent donation, but it is free, which is really great. And here it is, The Essential Elements of Digital Literacies. And so really, in this presentation, the credit for the ideas really go to Doug. And so I really encourage you to subscribe to his newsletter, check out his book, his blog. And back in, I want to say 2004, he had a really, really great TED Talk. If you're a fan of memes or the LOL cat, little pictures with funny words on it, he really does a great job of tracking how the meme, the evolution of that kind of funny, witty picture, how it really impacts digital literacy. So his TED Talk is right here. It's a great watch. I really encourage you to check that out. And of course, we have his Twitter handle here, and that's a really great way to connect with people around the world, including with myself, Alyssa, Annabelle, and the AOP Tech team. We certainly will send you the links to all of our social media outlets as well. So that is Doug. Great TED Talk, really great thinker and knowledgeable about the educational environment. I definitely want to give credit to him for this presentation, because this presentation really wouldn't be here without his initial thesis and then his book. So thank you to Doug for that, and also for him making it accessible and available, and that really ties into that open educational thinker mindset. So we've talked about remixes. We've talked about who Doug Belshaw is. Now we need to talk about what is literacy and who is literate. Now, I know a lot of you sitting there right now, you're like, no, I know how to read, so I'm literate. Well, here's a couple things we need to think about when we're thinking about literacy. And that first one is, I like the analogy, literacy is not a light switch. It's not on or off. No one is strictly illiterate or literate. It really is a spectrum. There's also another important point here, and that really is the fact that literacy is not ELA specific. So literacy is really for all areas of our lives. So one of the things that I particularly like to do in my spare time is I love cooking. I watch Chopped. Food Network is pretty much the only station that's on my TV. I love when they open the baskets, and I'm always like, bread pudding, making ice cream, the anti-griddle. I love that. And so when I look at my own life and I look at the culinary aspect world, I consider myself to be on that further end of that literacy spectrum. I really consider myself to be highly literate when it comes to cuisine, if you will. Another area that I really consider myself to be highly literate is in basic car repair. That's something I really enjoy. If you recall from a webinar a couple of years ago, I know Bill had a neighbor who's using a hammer drill to change the tires on his car, which kind of got me all excited because I love anytime I can get a new tool and work on my car. And I tell my wife, like, no, I need this new tool because, you know, the Johnson rod broke and I have to repair that. Little Seinfeld reference for you. So again, so we have the culinary aspect of my life where I consider myself highly literate, and of course on the basic car repair. Now I'm not changing out an engine block here. I'm, you know, oil, light bulbs, a tire here and there. And in those aspects, I consider myself to be more literate. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, I mentioned an air guitar a little bit earlier. That's the only guitar I know how to play. Despite the fact that I think it was 5th grade music, we all had to take guitar, and I tried. I did. I had a guitar at home. I practiced. My friends, they had like a little band, and I think I learned maybe 2 or 3 power chords, and I held my fingers in one place and just strummed away. So definitely when it comes to playing the guitar, not so high on that literacy spectrum. I definitely fall a lot more down towards that lower end of that spectrum. Same thing when it comes to, despite the best intentions of Frau Eichler, who I had for, I'm pretty sure, my entire high school career. Sprechen Sie Deutsch is about the limit of my German. And believe me, she tried and I tried, and it just didn't happen. And so again, in that sense, in my German language speaking ability, not that literate. So we have 2 instances, not English language related, where we see literacy is really a spectrum. So culinarily, car repair wise, I'm higher on that spectrum. Speaking German and playing the guitar, definitely on the lower end of the spectrum. And speaking German while playing the guitar, that's not happening at all. So we see the fact that there is a range, and we see the fact that literacy is not just contained to reading and writing. It really does permeate all aspects of our life. So I've shared 2 ideas, or 2 areas really of my life where I feel more literate. And so now this is where I wanted to kind of break in that back-channel chat. So today's meet, you've heard that term back-channel chat. It really functions as a private message board. And I wanted to use this opportunity. I like this tool specifically for the webinars for 2 reasons. The first reason being the fact that I want you guys to be able to interact with each other, your fellow attendees. I'm checking. We got 39 people, which is phenomenal. In fact, I'm pretty sure our high school webinar actually went international. So we have 39 people. And so I wanted to use this tool to provide you a space where you guys could come together and communicate with each other. And the second reason is I wanted to show a tool that I really like using in my classroom. And so that way I hope that if nothing else, you get some tools, some ideas that you can take back into your classroom. As a former English teacher, one of the great things about the English teaching is I got to show some movies. So we read Romeo and Juliet, and we acted it out, and we got to watch Romeo and Juliet. And as my students were watching it, it was really difficult to start and stop the movie and then to have those conversations and discussions because it just really interrupted the flow of the movie. But I wanted to make sure that my students were still engaged. They were thinking about connections to what we had read, noticing things that maybe were different or that were added in. And so what I did was by using today's meet, they could have that up on their screen. The movie was on the main overhead, and that way I could post questions in real time as they watch the movie and see their responses, which is really, really great tool. And that way I know they were engaged and weren't just like sitting there like, oh, you know, that they were really watching the movie. So feel free that as this tool gets rolled out, that I encourage you guys to interact throughout the presentation. There'll be some questions that I'll ask you, but really use it as an opportunity to share comments, reactions, interactions with your other attendees, with Alyssa, with Annabelle. So please use the tool during the presentation. I understand people are bouncing back and forth, and that's okay. So what I want you to do, I've talked about the tool a lot. What do I want you to do with it? So what I'd like you to do is I want you to share one area of your life, or and when I say life, your personal life, or it could be your professional life, where you fall towards that more literate end of the spectrum. So for me, that was the culinary, that was the car repair. So I want to hear about where do you fall in that more literate end of the spectrum. And to do that, I'm going to give you guys about 60 seconds to respond. We're going to do our first, well, actually, I guess our third song at this point. So I'm going to pause my camera for a second. I want you guys to go to that message board and enjoy our third musical selection. All right, and we are back. So for those of you who may have been, that sound was a little bit familiar to you, it was the Apache song by Bongo Rock, a song that would later become remixed by the Sugar Hill Gang. And in fact, this was Grandmaster Flash's remix of the Bongo Rock song Apache. Now, there is an incredible history to this song, and I definitely recommend, I'm pretty sure I hyperlinked this image. It brings you to an amazing article where it literally describes the entire history of that song. Just to break it down for you, that song, the original song, was actually a 1950s British song by Jerry London, which has been sampled over 500 times by people like Missy Elliott, Sir Mix-a-Lot, Kanye West. In fact, it has been sampled so many times and remixed so many times that it has been dubbed by the New York Times the national anthem of hip-hop. So again, we see a song that has been remixed. And you know, the remix idea is not unique to music. It's not unique to literature. One of my favorite paintings was called American Gothic. And if you Google American Gothic and look at the images, you can see that that painting has been remixed multiple times. And you'll see it with Homer Simpson on it. You'll see it with the Obamas on it. And it's really an interesting way to look at society as each generation remixes that same painting, American Gothic, and really updates it for a modern concept. Another great painting that does that is one called Nighthawks. You may have seen it. It's people sitting at a diner counter late at night, and in fact, it's been remixed to include things like Batman, Spider-Man, or their nemesis, Spider-Man, either one. Batman, Spider-Man, Robin Hood are sitting at the counter. And again, it's a really interesting way that we see society-wise people remixing things that previous generations have done. So, we've met Doug. We've heard some remixes. We've talked about the scale of literacy. So now we need to talk about what Doug refers to as the 8 essential elements of digital literacy. And actually, you know what? I'm just looking at my notes here, and I realized that I skipped ahead. I missed an important question. And so back right here, so I asked you on today's meet to share that area where you fall more literate. The next question is one that I want you to think about, and that's one: what areas don't you fall on that high end of the scale? Where do you maybe fall on that lower end of the literacy scale? And what are you doing to work on it? And I'm hoping that maybe one of those things is like attending today's webinar or tonight's webinar. And I hope that that's part of your plan on working on maybe that lower literacy thing of how can I grow that? How can I use a growth mindset to really improve and continually to get better at my craft? And so I give that as a challenge statement. For those of you keeping track, there will be, I think, about 4 or 5 challenge statements throughout this presentation. So certainly take notes and write them down because there's going to be more coming at you. So we talked about the Sugar Hill Gang. We talked about the 8 essential elements. Let's dive in, shall we? So this is all of the essential elements all arranged. And just forgive me, my window's a little big here. Let me just adjust this. There we go. So we have the 8 essential elements of digital literacies. And I think just looking at this, the one thing that's really important to understand here is that these are kind of core elements or pillars. And in fact, interchangeably throughout this presentation, I call them elements and pillars. But really, what I want you to think about is the fact that these all overlap. They really all do blend and come together. And as we start really diving into each one, you're going to get a sense to see how they kind of fit together. Another important thing to consider is the fact that these digital literacies are transient. So they change over time. They may involve using different tools or developing different habits of mind. And regardless, they almost always depend on the context in which you find yourself. Now, when Doug Belshaw wrote his book, he focused on the cultural element, the one we see in the top left-hand corner, as being what he thought was the most important. And he thought that because he saw that all the other literacies really fell under that cultural umbrella. But for this presentation, because of course we're doing a remix, I had to chop that up. And so our first element that we're going to go into here is actually going to be the element of confidence. And I'm going to get back to that in a second when we touch on that element. The last thing that I want to point a note on this slide is on the right-hand side of the page here, we have a message from Pope Francis from the World Communications Day, June 2014. And this is a link to his article, Vatican.va. I was going to say .com, it's VA. And this document really has some important significance for us as a tech department. Earlier this year, we were looking at our responsible use policy. It used to be called the acceptable use policy, and we've updated it to become the responsible use policy. And we developed that at the beginning of the year, and this really coincided with Bill Brannick found this article, and he shared it with us as a team, and he asked us just to take a look at it. And as we were reading through it, we really saw the fact that Pope Francis's message really aligned with a lot of the key elements of our own AOP Tech responsible use policy. And so as we read through this, and then I'm preparing this presentation, and this brings us also into the version 4 I mentioned earlier. So Doug's presentation, that's version 1. At the beginning of, actually, excuse me, at the end of the year, we had our Secondary Technology Academy. And I was asked to be the keynote presenter there. And our tech committee, we talked about what should we talk about, what do we want to lead off at that conversation. And one of the contributors mentioned Doug Belshaw. So Doug was version 1. And so for that Secondary Tech Academy in June, I took Doug's original presentation and I did my first remix of it. So that brings us to version 2. So how are we on 4? One of the big things that AOP Tech does is we do produce a monthly newsletter. And that's a newsletter, we actually produce 2 monthly newsletters. One newsletter for teachers, the other newsletter for parents. And we certainly encourage you to drop links to those newsletters into contacts with parents or guardians. If you send like a weekly or a monthly email blast, or I know some people are using Seesaw or Class Dojo, please feel free to share our resources with the parents. So for those newsletters, we really wanted to be able to do a deep dive into each one of these elements. This presentation tonight really is going to be an introduction. We're gonna go through each element. We're gonna talk about what they are, but it's in those newsletters that we really do a deep dive, and there's a lot of really great resources. And so I certainly encourage you, if you haven't been reading our newsletters, they are available on our brand new website, aoptech.org. Click on the newsletters button and you'll see them posted there. And I believe, so let's see, we had a September and October newsletter, so if you missed it yet, you only have 2 to catch up on. But that's where we've really done some a deeper discussion, if you will. And so that's version 3. And then, of course, we used this idea of these essential digital literacies to really be kind of a guiding focus for us this year. And so that's the reason why we're starting off our webinar series with this topic, which of course brings us to version 4. So I know I told you, I teased you with that back at the beginning. 4 versions later, we had Doug's was the original. The first one was that keynote address. We had the newsletters was 3, and now we have the 4th version. And I really, I can imagine, I really look forward to actually looking where we go by the end of this year, because I'm sure we'll probably be at version 5, 8, 13, who knows? But I think it's going to be really, really exciting. So we have Doug's presentation, and we have Pope Francis's World Communications Day speech, and we're gonna put them together. We're gonna take that baseline from Doug and the symbols from Pope Francis, and we're gonna mash them up together and create our own remix here. So I definitely encourage you, when this presentation gets sent to you, to check out Pope Francis's message, because I think it has some really great implications for us as teachers, and it really has a lot of impact for our classroom as well. So, element number 1, Doug said was the cultural element. For us today, we're going to look at the confident element. And the reason being, the reason I went with the element of confidence is because I really see that these webinars, the newsletters, are part of a beginning of a discussion. And I know that throughout the year, as we share tools and ideas and resources, the fact that there's going to be times where you might not feel so confident. And so I'm hoping that by focusing on this element of confidence, to really examine it and to really focus on it, to say, okay, well, how do we build this confidence? And I think developing the confident element, first thing, and it ties back to that question that I asked you, the today's meet question, was where are we in a high literacy area, and where are we on that lower end of that spectrum? So the first thing we need to do to manage our own learning is to really identify that lower literacy need. Then, once we have, okay, I know that this is what I want to work on, now we can start to build on ways and ideas on how to grow that. So it really does tie into that growth mindset, which I know is the theme for last year's webinars. So, I think the first challenge, and certainly as a tech coach, I can speak to this, and I see it often when I'm working with teachers, is that I recognize that there's oftentimes a hesitation, whether it's a concern or it's a lack of confidence in using new digital tools. And I know that a lot of that stems from the fact that the digital world and the real world, if you will, are very different in the analog world. So I know that when I was building this presentation, if I made a mistake or if I deleted something, a slide, I could hit Control-Z. I love the keyboard shortcuts. Control-Z, which is undo. For my Apple folks out there, your Apple-Z. Undo. I love that. Or maybe you've seen a little back arrow sometimes, and you hit the back arrow. I love undo. It's a great tool. I don't have that in real life, though. I can't undo something, you know, that maybe I messed up a lesson or something crashed and burned. I can't go back and hit that undo. And so I know that sometimes that difference, just because we are working in two different worlds, the digital one and that analog world, that there will be some things that are different. And I know that that can be a stumbling block for a lot of people. So I want you to, we've recognized that, and I want you to focus on that confidence, on becoming confident. So, and then we have this quote that I pulled from Pope Francis. We need to recover a certain sense of deliberateness and calm. And I really love what Pope Francis is saying here, that this calls for us to have the time, the ability to be silent, to reflect, to listen to ourselves, to our needs, to think, what is that area that maybe I don't fall so high on that literacy spectrum? What do I need to work on? And certainly, excuse me, we need to be patient with ourselves as we work and we grow our own literacy abilities. And I think that really comes down to those two words of to be deliberate, to find those issues, to identify those areas, and then to have that sense of calm, to not let those differences between the analog and the digital world throw us off our game, but to really be confident that, you know what, we can go through this, and we do have resources out there. And of course, you have resources on the internet, you have resources on Twitter, and then of course you have our office, the AOP Tech team, to give you that sense of calm as you are working through these digital literacies. So we move on to our second element, and the element is the civic element, which at its simplest definition really is to organize. And we have the quote up here in the top. Now, ICT, by the way, stands for Information Communications Technology. And so the quote reads, the ability to understand and make use of technology, i.e. digital literacy, is proving essential to employment success, civic participation, accessing entertainment, and education. And then we're going to pair that with the Pope Francis's quote that says, good communication helps us to grow closer, to know one another better, and to grow in unity. And so we start to see how these two ideas really do coalesce. We have this civic pillars centered around this ability that literacy in all forms allows us to organize, to share, to connect with other people. And in doing so, it really allows us to fully participate in society. And I return back to you know, my two areas of high literacy strength in cooking and car repair. So for me, when I go out with friends or we go to a restaurant, and I always love trying new food, there's that shared idea of talking about the thing I cooked last week. And in fact, if you were in South Philly for the Temple homecoming game, you might have smelled the delicious aroma of smoked pork. And I did some smoked pork in my little back patio. And so that's something that allowed me to invite my friends over and share my love of cooking, my passion with them, and allow us to grow closer as a friends group. Now, the third person I'd like to really kind of bring in here is really our Archbishop. And our Archbishop, he has instructed us that one of our main responsibilities as educators is really to equip saints, i.e. our students, for this world and the next. And with as many digital tools are being developed and as usage of these tools increases, we see that our mission of preparation really extends beyond that traditional classroom walls, and extends into the digital universe. And just like that first quote I read said, we need to prepare our students because this is an element that pervades all these other aspects of their life, their education, their employment. You know, even something as simple as using video in your classroom, that is, it's quickly becoming a life skill of employers are oftentimes expecting people to be able to record, produce, edit, upload, shoot video. And so even that little activity that maybe you bring into a lesson where the kids, you know, record their presentation, or they stand in the hall and they read their story, that's training one of the civic pillar, because that's going to allow them to organize, to communicate, and to connect with other people. So I really like that. So the other thing that we need to look at, we have Doug Belshaw, we have Pope Francis, and now our Archbishop, and we're all talking about this idea of engagement to grow closer, this unity. And so as educators, this raises some interesting questions for us. How can we you know, help our students master the use of these digital tools to help them grow in unity? I think a lot of times we see some divisiveness in the digital world, but how can we use these tools to grow unity? And then also, how can we as educators use digital tools to grow closer as a community? And I know that in today's Meet Chat window, I know some of those questions are going out, and I really encourage you to respond with some of your ideas on how we can use these tools to grow in unity with each other. So I think it's a really, really great element of the civic pillar, if you will. Moving on to our third pillar is one of communication. And with communication, we all need to understand how to communicate. There are so many tools available. In fact, you might have seen a commercial on TV. Google is just releasing a new video calling app called Duo. And I am super excited to try it out. I haven't gotten it yet. But, you know, my mom uses an iPhone. I'm still Team Android. And it's always been a pain, and I don't have FaceTime, and she doesn't have Hangouts. And apparently Duo is a brand new tool that's going to break through all those barriers and allow my mother and I to communicate together. So that's something that I'm very excited about. I'm sure she is as well. But so that brings us to the point of we have all these tools. What tool is best? What are the norms, the etiquette for using these tools? These are all questions that we have to consider when choosing a tool to communicate in a digital environment. And so I really wanted to take this element of communication quite literally, and this is the beginning of the school year. And so I've asked both Alyssa and Annabelle to share some of the communication tools that they really liked using in their classroom. So Alyssa, what communication tool do you really like to use?
I really love Remind, and I know that's something we talk a lot about because we have our own Remind group that you can join for AOP Tech, but it was such a great tool to use with students and parents so that they could opt in to have those messages right to them. I could send out little tidbits, and I could get back, and it would get back and forth with folks, but it was still all safe and secure, and I never had to, you know, give out my phone number, yet I could do everything, you know, from my phone as easily as texting. So Remind had always been a very favorite of mine, utilizing it just with students and parents. It was the safe way for us at the middle school level to do so. And before I kick it over to Annabelle, I'm going to give a little plug for Duo. So Aaron, call your mom because it works great. So if you haven't used Duo yet, I have a household where I have a Google Pixel phone, and my husband has an iPhone, and that's what we use to essentially FaceTime now, and it works fantastically. So you have no more excuses Call your mom; she'll appreciate it.
You know, I will take you up on that. And, you know, I also agree with you with Remind. I think one of my favorite parts of Remind was that scheduling feature, because it really allowed me to. I maybe was writing the message on my prep or at lunch, and I could schedule that message to go out to my parents. And a lot of times I thought like a telemarketer, so I wanted to hit their inbox at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, because I knew they would have a chance to take a look at it. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great tool, and I see a lot of great use in both with teachers and with communicating with students and with communicating with parents. So thank you for sharing that. Annabelle, how about you? What tools do you really like to use in your classroom for communication?
I actually love Twitter. I think it was Anthony on today's meet who used the phrase, "It's a game changer," and I agree with him. I've been on Twitter for about 4 years now and have interacted with so many educators from around the world. It's really amazing. And every time I log in and go on there, I've learned something new, whether it's about a new tool or a new strategy or just inspiration in not only for the classroom but for life itself. So it's a great tool to be able to communicate with educators and also to peek into classrooms. There's some teachers who use it to share what's happening inside their classroom with parents and other educators, and so I follow some of them, and it's neat to see the great things that are happening in the classroom too. So I have to say that's definitely one of my favorite tools.
That's excellent. And I know on Twitter there's a lot of times Twitter chats.
Yep.
What can you give our viewers a little idea of what is a Twitter chat?
Well, it's exactly what you said. It's a chat. If you follow, they use the hashtag, and if you follow that, there's groups. It's groups of educators that get together, usually on a certain day and a specific time, and they're just chatting about a specific topic. So, for instance, there is a Catholic Ed chat that every Saturday morning or Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. you can go onto Twitter and follow the hashtag Catholic Ed Chat, and they'll be talking about a specific topic, but it'll be all Catholic educators.
I love it because it's such a great way to find people that have the same background and the same interest as you, and I think it's a great way to really just connect and grow as a community. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great communication tool. And certainly if you check out our newsletters, we have a newsletter coming out shortly with a whole bunch of communication tools. I know Remind's in there. I think Twitter's in there as well. So it's definitely one that, and yes, Alyssa, I will call my mother. So I'll do that once we get done tonight and check in and see her and ask her to download Duo. So hopefully we can do some FaceTime with mom. So moving on to our fourth element here, we're looking at the cultural element. And this is one that the January newsletter, I've already kind of outlined it and sketched it out. So I know in the January newsletter we're going to do a really deep dive in there. But for today, one of the goals of this webinar is that I wanted us to grow as a community of educators. I wanted to move the cultural element away from the digital world for just a second, and I want to think about how it applies to us as teachers, and in fact, how it applies to our classrooms. You know, one of my strengths as a teacher, I feel, was my classroom culture. Was how I built that environment when the kids walked in, and it really started from what I put up on the walls to the music that was pumping out of the speakers, to how I greeted my students as they entered the room. It was all part of a very intentional classroom culture of energy, of happiness, and of learning. And so what I'd like you to do is, in today's meet, I'd like you to describe what is your classroom culture, and if you can, you know, how do you create that? What are you doing to facilitate a classroom culture? So that's going to bring us up to our fourth musical interlude. And just as a note, so we're going to go back to the 70s to a band called the Childlights, and their song, "Are You a Woman?" Now, this is a song that has been remixed to a very popular modern version. I'm not going to tell you what the new modern version of this song is, but I want you to go ahead and respond to that classroom culture, listen to the song, and when I catch you on the flip side, we'll talk about what that song is. So, 1970s, the Chi-Lites, here we go. And we're back. So that was a nice little break because I was able to jump up and grab my second bottle of seltzer. So I would love to, I popped in there just a little bit. I saw somebody talk about controlled chaos, but I'd love to, if Annabelle, if you could give us just a little report on some of the conversations you're seeing in that today's Meet back channel conversation. Well, actually, first thing, did anybody get the song, and I'll play it for them just one more time, is that first, like, second 9, I think it comes in. Listen right here. Little drum solo. So, Annabelle, did anybody figure out what the modern remix version of the 1970s Chi-Lites song is?
Yes, actually, Nancy did right almost at the start, and then it looks like, yeah, Nancy, right on. Beyonce, Crazy in Love.
I love it. It's a great, great wedding song. Everybody dances to it. So what's going on in today's Meet chat window?
Well, it looks like, I mean, everybody's having great input. Conversations are going. It looks like the culture, the one word that really sticks out is building relationships. Everybody that they're inputting, such as greeting students personally in the first thing in the morning, morning meetings, it's all about building relationships with the students. So that seems to be one of the key things that everybody that I'm seeing on here is trying to do in order to cultivate that relationship.
I love it. I love it. Creating relationships. That is phenomenal. Thank you, Annabelle.
Yep.
And in fact, it looks like I forgot to put that up there, but that is the picture. If that's not a 70s cover right there, I love it. That, and I'm just jealous of the hair because being bald and all. So let's move on to our fifth pillar, our fifth element. And this is the element of critical. And the critical element really asks us to be curious skeptics. And in fact, when I was at Villanova, in fact, well, I'm wearing my Temple pin, but when I was at Villanova for my graduate degree, I had an education research professor who we were learning about reading and learning different educational research and trying to identify what is a good study, what is a weak study, because believe it or not, there were a lot of educational research, published articles in reputable journals that when you really looked at it, had some serious flaws. And so she asked us to be curious skeptics. And she put an image, I think it was of Dumbledore up on the board, but I know he had like a long beard. And she kind of had this pose of like, And it was that I'm in thought, I'm contemplating, but I'm also looking askance. I'm curious, I'm concerned, I'm not so trusting. And this is a huge element in the days of well, today. You might have heard a term called fake news, and it's been buzzing around a little bit. We've seen it, we've heard about it, and this is going to be a great thing, because I know we have a webinar coming up next month that Alyssa talked about as part of the two-part series. And as we're teaching in our classrooms, we really have this idea of like, well, you know, who's behind this information? What are their motives? Is this legitimate? Is it fake news? And Anna, Alyssa, I just wanted to ask you, because I know that next month you're going to be doing the webinar. What can the attendees expect to learn about fake news in the webinar?
Awesome. Thanks for plugging my webinar, Aaron. So we're going to discuss, it's really hard for kids, I think, right now. I think it's hard for adults even, too. We are inundated with so much news media. It's on our phone. There's push notifications. It's on our social media. Facebook's got the whole thing on the side. It's in our faces 24/7. And it makes it really hard for, I think, kids and adults, but kids especially, to really understand, you know, what is breaking news? What's the most important? How do I decipher what I'm reading or hearing or watching a video about to know where that truth is? What are good sources to use? So we're going to look in our webinar next month just about helping kids, one, handle the inundation of news media that they have in their lives. I can't imagine what it's got to be like to be a little kid and hear about some of the mass disasters and catastrophes and shootings that they hear about today, but don't really have the skills yet to process. So how do we present it in a way that's developmentally appropriate for our K-8 kids and really differentiating that? So tools and different resources for that, along with looking at tools that specifically target the concept of fake news, so evaluating resources, kind of digging and reading between the lines and learning those different fallacies that can appear in any kind of writing. So I hope you'll join us next month as we take a look at that. Great for across any subject area, as we have kids coming in asking us as teachers questions about the things that they hear on the news. And really our role as educators, no matter what our content area is to help them learn how to decipher and handle that both academically and emotionally. So that's what we'll take a look at next month. So I hope you'll join us.
For any of our attendees out there, if you're watching this on YouTube and the archived version, how do they sign up to join that webinar, Alyssa?
So there are two components. So if you've already registered for Act 48 on courseware, courseware only covers Act 48. So that's on the Act 40 on the courseware site. By registering, you have to attend both this month and November. The registration for our webinars is hosted on our website, aoptech.org. That's where everything is for anything that goes through our office, any of the PLC meetings that are upcoming for technology teachers, our webinars, any of our events. When we get to it later in the year, there'll be a link to EdCamp from there. So any event that you're attending, whether that be virtual or in person, the registration for us for access to those things is on our website, aoptech.org. That's
awesome. Thank you very much. And that really, and I love that connection of fake news that Alyssa talks about, because that really ties into this idea of critical thinking and identifying who are behind these sources. And I love Pope Francis's quote here about, we fail to see our real neighbor. And I know I've seen a little preview of Alyssa's presentation, and she really provides some tremendous classroom activities and resources that you can use really just kind of out of the box, and it really there's one that involves a dandelion picture from Fukushima, and it's a great discussion piece, and I think it's a really great way to bring this critical element into your classroom. And I certainly encourage you to join us next month for that webinar, because I know it's going to be a phenomenal time. So we're rounding out the bottom half of our elements here, and on the sixth element is the element of cognitive. And here Doug reminds us that all these digital tools are in some way expanding our mind. Exposure to various ways of building digital environments and new ways of interacting with each other, they all come together and allow us to grow. And so one of the new tools that we add, I really look at it as we're adding a new lens to our vision. And in fact, that was one of the things I mentioned. I did my undergrad at Temple University, and Temple really prides themselves on having a diverse campus. And I saw that in my English classes, and it was phenomenal to read a story, and we all read the same story, but because I had students in my class from Africa, from India, from Asia, it all of a sudden, they were reading that story through a different lens. And when we would come and have discussions, it really allowed my own thinking, my own thought processes to really develop. And so I take that example and I want to apply that multiple lenses idea really to the digital world. So with each one of these new tools, we have this opportunity to really enjoy and to comprehend a greater slice of the digital world, if you will. Going back to my working on cars example, you know, if the only tool I have in my toolbox is a hammer, you know, the only problems I'm going to see are nails. And for those of you who have not done any car maintenance, hammers and cars usually don't work very well together. And so really we want to bring in those other lenses, those other tools to really allow us to explore and to interact, to expand our knowledge, as Pope Francis says. And one of the ways I've recently expanded my digital toolkit, now Google Duo is going to be the next tool I'm going to expand my toolkit, but the latest one, and this really goes in thanks to the AOP Physical Education Department. If you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen a very sweaty selfie show up, and don't worry, I'm going to show it to you because I can't tease you like that. And so I was at a professional development, and just as a note, if a physical education teacher ever invites you to their PD, loose-fitting clothing is advised. The business coat definitely came off. But so they were rolling out a tool called Slack, and this was one that they were using as a departmental communication tool because so many teachers are, you know, 122 different schools across 5 different counties. It's 80 miles from end to end, and so they're using Slack to help bridge that communication gap. And so I got to learn all about Slack. It's incredible. I love it. It's text messaging for business. It's awesome. And so that allowed me, by going to their presentation, which I thought I was just presenting on this tool and then leaving. The video I'm going to show you tells a different story, but it really allowed me to grow and expand my knowledge. And addition to growing my knowledge and, you know, knowledge really, it also allowed me to work on my technique for squats, lunges, and planks. And so here, let me bring up that video because it's a pretty good one. Now the audio might get a little messed up. Just a bit of perspiration. Just a bit of perspiration there. But definitely it was a great time, and I had the opportunity to really expand my my toolkit and grow my knowledge. So follow me on Twitter. You'll find, you know, some amusing videos of me every once in a while. So we're coming up to our second to last element, and that is the element of constructive. And this element really focuses us on the ability to reuse, and here's a word, remix the information. And so just like I talked about using a remix of Doug Belshaw's book, you know, and I've provided several examples of remixes and songs from the Chi-Lites to Apache to Will Smith in Miami, we see how these songs, they start in one area and then they become later remixed. And that really is analogous to this presentation. And just like we remixed our responsible use policy using Pope Francis's message. So we have this opportunity to really grow together. And in fact, you'll notice that the responsible use policy is linked down here. It's also on our website, aoptech.org. And so after you've read Pope Francis's message, you take a look at that policy and you'll see how the elements kind of blend together. And this constructive element really, really pairs well with our final element. And that's the element of creativity. And I think that they go hand in hand. And then this is where at the beginning I talked about how there's overlap. And we can start to see how some of these elements really do ebb and flow and really overlap at times. And I think that creative element is really where we see things shine. One of the tools I love using as a teacher is Kahoot. For those of you who don't know it, it's a great way to do review for tests, or really you can actually use it. You can flip the Kahoot even and use it to introduce information. But one of the things that I love about Kahoot is the fact that Kahoot has a huge resource library. The fact that I don't have to create something from scratch. The fact that I can take someone's presentation and I can remix it. And I love that. So as a teacher, that saves me time because I'm not starting from scratch. I can take something that somebody else built and then maybe I tweak it. Maybe I remove 2 of the questions and I add 2 of my own, or I eliminate some of the option choices depending on how I'm using it in my classroom. And a pro tip, and let me jump up into Kahoot just quickly, is it's the ability. So once I discover a really great Kahoot and I find one that has really great resources, what I recommend doing is, let's see if I can sign in with Google, if that'll get me in. There we go. So one of the things I really like to do is once I find a Kahoot and I've identified, so here are some ones I really love, parts of speech, is if you look down to see who created it, is click on their name, because, and this works well, especially if you look up, if you put in, on the search here, you put in the book title, or if you put in, we know the fact that Miss Evans here has a lot of really good Kahoots that maybe for me fit in really well with a lot of my lessons. We all had or I certainly had growing up, I believe it was the Pearson's vocab book, the level A, level B, level C. Put that in here, and I guarantee you're going to find some really, really great Kahoots. But then for that power user tip, click on the username, and you'll discover the fact that if that person has done chapter 1 and chapter 2, odds are they've also probably done chapter 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at Kahoot, but then also to click on the usernames to see, especially if you really like their presentation. So with creative, we have this idea of new and original. So the Kahoot activity that I built certainly wasn't original, belonged to Miss Evans, but I copied it and then I tweaked it, just like that Will Smith song from Miami wasn't original either. And I think as educators, sometimes we confuse the two. We confuse new with original, and that's not the case. So Will Smith's song wasn't original, yet I would argue that it was new. Just like the Kahoot that I gave, even though Miss Evans did it originally, I copied it, I tweaked it, I added some of my own questions. So I did create something new. Just like Will Smith's song was different from, I believe, the 1970s song. It is not original, but it's new. And I think in that difference between originality and newness is where we see this final pillar really shine of creative. And that's something that, in my classroom, you know, calling something new, whether it's a new idea, a new song, a new test review activity, really is saying that it has some sort of additional value that original did not have. And that's where we see this creative element come into play. Now, I'm certainly not advocating for plagiarism. You know, I believe in citing our sources and certainly giving attribution where it's warranted. Just like when I started this presentation, I gave the credit to Doug Belshaw because these are, you know, his ideas. But so while this presentation itself is not necessarily original, it is new because I've taken it and I remixed it and I added some of the new flair to it, that creative nature, the songs, making it a new presentation. And if we look at the SAMR model, because as teachers, that's one we often look at, you know, the first two steps, the substitution, the addition, really we see the creative element show up in the final two, in the modification and the redefinition steps. And that's where we see creativity really come in and invigorate the content. And that creativity, that newness is really what drives that new value, that it has something that it didn't have before. So we've met Doug, we've talked about remixes, we've talked about literacy, I talked about the 8 pillars. The one thing that I haven't done, well, there's one question I haven't answered yet. And I want to take a second. I want you, if you have any questions or comments, I want you to drop them into the Days Meet channel. So that way we can take a look at them in a second. But the one thing that I haven't answered is the fact of, and it's that first question, the question that was on slide 1, what is digital literacy? We talked about what literacy is. We talked about it as a spectrum. We talked about Doug Belshaw's 8 elements. We said that they're a matrix. But I haven't given you a definition. There wasn't a slide that said digital literacy is. And the reason is really because myself and the AOP Tech team is we want you to be part of that conversation. So over the rest of the year, I challenge you, I think that's the second challenge statement, to read our monthly newsletters. And I want you to interact with us and to really grow together and develop this definition. We're going to do a deep dive into each element in each month. There's going to be links, there's going to be resources, and yes, even some musical selections. And that's where I want us to really, that we are going to answer that question of what digital literacy is together. And that's why I started with that first element of confidence. I know that for us to grow our knowledge and to support each other, to begin this journey, I encourage and I challenge you, number 3, to continue this conversation with us over the next year. This was one that I don't want it to stop at the end of this webinar. I encourage you to bring this conversation to your colleagues, to your educator friends. If you're on one of those Twitter chats, send them this presentation, ask them the questions. Share the articles, put them in the faculty room, whether that means you print them out and you tape them to the door, or you put them on the table, or you send them out to your colleagues. But please share this, communicate with them, and then bring that back into the discussion with us. And so with that being said, I really want to do a final check on the Today's Meet chat. And just before I go to Alyssa for any comments or questions, I promised you I would show you kind of the back side of Today's Meet. So, and I mentioned it is a free channel. I didn't have anyone sign up. Here is, I do have the option to create login users, but honestly, I rarely do. Now, each one of these chat rooms, I can control how long they stay open. So, for example, this chat conversation is going to be available for the next week. So if people put in resources in there or shared ideas, you want to grab them. They're going to be there for the next week, and after that, it goes away. But in that, we do have projector view. There's a transcript that you can print out, or you can, for example, send into their Google Classroom so that the students have it. But it's a really great tool. You can control, you can have a room that's open for indefinitely. Maybe it's one room for the whole year. So it's a great tool. I really encourage you guys to check it out. Free tool. with that being said, I'm going to pass the controls back over to you, Alyssa. And are there any questions or comments in the today's Meet chat window?
There are not any questions that came through, but lots of great discussion. I can't wait for you to go back through and take a look at the great discussion that happened here tonight. One thing that I want to point out before I share my screen that Anne mentioned, when you were talking about that creativity and not reinventing the wheel there, she said that in her class they talk about inventing versus innovating, and when it comes to engineering design, why recreate the wheel? Any movement forward is movement forward, and I love that. I think that's such a tangible way to explain that to the kids. There's lots of Kahoot love also going on in the screen as well. So can you see my screen? I'm trying to get to my controls here. Here we are.
Just as you're wrapping up, I just wanted to certainly thank you, Alyssa, and Annabelle as well for all your help in the chat window and for jumping in the presentation. But most importantly, I want to thank all the attendees out there. We jumped up to 41, so thank you for joining us tonight, for spending part of your evening with us as an AOP Tech community. And with that, I will pass it off to you, Alyssa.
Perfect. Yes, it's awesome to see all those things here. So 2 things I want to mention to everyone. As number one, know that Aaron mentioned our newsletters. Our newsletters are shared out with building administrators, with your principals to pass on to you, just like the information about our webinar series and any of our other AOP techs that goes through your principals. But you can also find that on our aoptech.org website. So when you're there, right along the top is newsletter, and you can get links to any of our newsletters and see our teacher feature that we're featuring a different teacher around the Archdiocese every month, and the great things that they're doing in their classrooms. So if you would like to be featured, or you know a teacher in your building that you'd like to be featured, there's also a little nomination form there as well for you, so we can help continue to recognize teachers around your buildings and around your schools. And so with that, we'll wrap up today. I thank you for joining us. Thank you, Aaron, for a great presentation. Thank you, Annabelle, for helping out with the controls back there. It was awesome to have such great conversation in the middle of our week. Way to get through the middle of the week, everyone. We did it together. So as always, know that AOP Tech is on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Pinterest, and Instagram. We are on all that social media that we talked about in that chat as being great ways to connect with us. We want to see what you're doing in your classroom. We want to retweet it. We want to talk about it. And we want to show off all your good works. And we want to give you a space as well to share with one another. So we are AOP Tech on all of those platforms. This is aoptech.weebly.com, which is actually our old web address, but it'll still direct you to aoptech.org. And I mentioned earlier we talked about Remind as a tool with our students, but also we have a Remind group as well for AOP Tech, and that gives you the kind of the inside hint as to when those webinar registrations and reminders and different things like that go up. So feel free to join our Remind group as well. It's a great way to stay in the know, and we try not to text you all that often. We try to limit ourselves so we don't blow up your phones every day, because we could easily send out lots of different things. But we do try to send out a tech tip here and there, or different event registrations. So feel free to join that as well. And if you have any questions following this webinar, feel free to reach out to Aaron, myself, Annabelle, or Bill Brannick. We're always happy to help you. We're here to help with all your ed tech needs. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.